Hi there, reading number 2 of Freya and the Mages of Sin. Just to catch up on it, and just in case you missed the first one, Freya's travelled to the town of Fulcrum, responding to the call of her friend the wizard Tagorli, who is somebody that she would go a long way to help. So she's arrived in Fulcrum. He's not in the tavern where she's expected to find him, so she's settling down to have something to eat. And that's where we start with the story. I'll just read the last couple of sentences from last time, and then we'll go forward from there. I think it's going to be a little bit longer than 10 minutes because I wanted to get to the point that I wanted to get to, so hopefully you can stick it out for that long. Okay. Freya had not even begun to eat yet when a sense of someone right behind her and too focused on her made her tense her fist ready to fight. Just as she began to turn, a rasping voice right behind her ear made her finish that turn in delighted anticipation. "Freya Fjordrider, fancy meeting you here again," it gravelled. The voice could belong to only one person, the same person who was the only one who would escape alive from giving her such a nickname. It was First himself. "First, you sneaky old Keisha, you nearly wore a fist in the face," Freya said, swinging round on the bench and flinging a leg back over it to see him better. "You always did love to live dangerously, though." "A fist to the face isn't going to spoil these looks," the man said, and Freya had to wryly admit that it was so. He stood back, hands spread, as if to say, "Look your worst," and she did so. First was a study in opposites. One side of his face was handsome in a dark, black-eyed, passionate way, almost too handsome. The other was a ruin of scar and smashed bones, with no eye, although she noticed he was having one of his periods of putting a spelled gemstone into the empty socket, this time one that glowed with a pearly greenish light. The handsome side was a result of his mother and father, but the horrible side was the result of a spiked mace that would have killed him if it had been a sword, or if he had been a weaker man. Freya had seen it happen. She and this man had ridden together some years ago, soon after she had left her home plains and begun to journey. He had been a good teacher, if learning how to fight and drink and jad like a wildcat could be considered a good thing. Freya had thought it was, and still did, though she was not always so keen on his ethics, which is what had seen them go their separate ways. At the time it had not been amicable, but when they ran into each other since, they had always been pleased to see each other in a wary sort of way. Wary anybody wise would and should be around First the Fierce, that leader of a ragtag band of near criminals, his strong body covered in mail and the traditional bad guy black leather, his dark hair long and wild and silvered with grey, his one remaining eye so black that Freya had never seen his pupil. He looked like what he was, and what he was tough and as fierce as his name. "You look good to me," she told him now. He did too. You could get used to anything if you looked at it long enough, and she had always felt that the two sides of his face were a good match for those of his personality. Besides, the last time they'd met, he'd helped her, and she was feeling very benevolent towards him. With First, you never knew which way it might go, but for now, she was glad to see him. "Eat with me?" First put a booted foot over the bench and sat beside her as she turned back to her meal. "You, on the other hand, look like a camel quiche you out," he said, "so I can't return the compliment." Freya laughed, a quick shout of amusement, and nearly choked on a hunk of bread. She thumped the table with one hard fist to help herself swallow it down. "You always wear a smooth-tongued bastard," she said, when she could once more talk. "It's my magical tones," First said, gesturing to Pyros for ale. Not everyone would rate drink to table service here, but First always did everywhere, if people knew what was good for them. His so-called magical tones sounded like someone was scouring out a pot, the result of a near strangling some years before. First had not lived a gentle life. Freya, however, had always liked his voice. It sounded like rocks rolling and knocking together on the ocean floor, and it vibrated her chest bone and other parts pleasantly. "Tell me some stories in your magical voice," she said now, biting mutton off the leg bone and chewing. "What have you been doing?" she said, muffledly, her mouth still full. "Who Keishan cares?" he said. "The same old mercenary things. What have you been doing, Freya Fjordrider? Been riding anyone else?" Freya raised her eyebrows and shook back one long braid as she turned her head to see his face better. She twinkled her blue eyes at his, the one black and the one green-stoned and shining eerily in the tavern's dim light. "Why, are you interested in a gallop, First the Fierce?" "With you, Freya," he said, voice getting even lower and more gravelly. "I always want to gallop." And the intensity of that black eye, the rumble of his voice, and the sense of his strength made Freya go warm in places she thought the long ride had turned numb. He'd always done that to her, the black-souled bastard. Tig would not be back yet for at least some hours, and she'd had a long journey and no Hagar at the end of it, as she'd expected. She threw down her mutton and came up off the bench in one long-legged swing of her boots. "Ah, Keisha, I'm always ready for a trot out with you too," she said, re-slinging her saddlebags, swiping up her ale and heading for the door of the common room. "Come on, before my good sense gets the better of me. I don't have a room yet. It better be yours." Behind her, she could hear Furse's rasping chuckle as he followed her. "That's my Freya," he said. "That's my Freya," she replied as he caught her up at the door. "As well you know." And he only laughed because indeed he did. Peros the Stout rolled his eyes as she pointed at her dinner to tell him she still wanted it, and then they were out of the common room and making their way across the covered walkway that led to the tavern proper. Something about some far distant Peros ancestor buying the next door building and making it into a bigger bar, she seemed to remember, as she and First came together there against the rails that fenced it from the street, and kissed like they'd always kissed. Fire and passion and violence, and a kind of love that came from knowing each other well, the good and the bad. All those things mixed up together and coming out as chemistry. Ale splashed onto the wooden floor, and then her saddlebag slipped off her shoulder and splonked into the beer spill. Furse's warm hand crept up under her cold mail shirt, and his very hard and muscled self was pushed against her, some bits harder than others. Despite her enjoyment of this, Freya pulled back and snorted amusedly. "Gonna hunt me in broad daylight like a paid strumpet?" she asked him. "No, just warming you up in case that little breeze is making you chilly," First said with equal amusement, bringing his hand down, much to her regret, and gesturing onwards towards the tavern proper. He looked at her sardonically, one side of his face curled up into a beautiful smile, the other a scarred sneer that never changed. "Hurry then, First Rider, or the good people of Fulcrum might get more than their fill of overheated viewing." Freya looked out of the walkway and towards the main street, where scandalised, prosperous citizens had paused in their paths to watch the spectacle of two such prime physical specimens of humanity rubbing against each other in full view. When Furse's ruined face was shown to them as he turned to Jester, they gasped as one and hurried on. "Well, that cooled them down anyway," Freya laughed. "Come on, I can feel a chill returning as well. Come and warm my cold heart, fierce one." "Your heart was never cold and never will be," First said, and for once he wasn't mocking her, and his passion for her was there to be seen in that black eye that usually hid so much. "I've missed you, Freya Fjordrider," he rumbled. "Come and warm my cold heart." She took him by a convenient handle and led him into the tavern proper, and there they stayed until the sun was full down. Her mutton was the only thing that got both cold and hard that afternoon, and was still sitting there on the bench untouched when she returned to it. She sent it back and ordered more, and First ordered likewise. They sat shoulder to shoulder in the now noisy and crowded common room and ate contentedly, or Freya did anyway. Who knew what was in the mind of First, that restless spirit? He seemed happy enough anyway, talking with her of old battles and new journeys. They were back to that half-friendly, half-combative relationship that had always existed between them when away from the pleasures of jadding or fighting. A tankard each of ale went down easily, and another as they jibed back and forth, judging each other's performance in the bedroom harshly, and Freya was just gnawing the last derricks of meat off her mutton bone, and First was comparing her actions to an earlier event and suggesting she should be using more tongue and less teeth, when she saw Tig enter the tavern across the room. It had been hard to miss. He was dressed in his favourite colours of pink, red and grey. His long legs were encased in tight striped hose, and his scrawny chest in a party-coloured doublety thing, with dagged sleeves and too many pointless danglements, looking as lanky and flamboyant as ever. At his back, thoroughly adding to the garishness, were a collection of some of the most colourful wizards Freya had ever seen, and she'd seen a mage war or two, so that was saying something. "Good timing," she said to First. "I've just finished eating and had my fill of your insults, and look, the friend I came to help has arrived." First saw who she was looking at and said, "Ah, yes, so only now you tell me why you are here, and that it is the wizard you have come to help. Then you're about to become very angry in a short time, so just keep in mind that I didn't remember that you knew him, and our recent coming together was in no way part of a plot." He brushed a hand down her cheek, laughing at her expression, then got up from his seat beside her and strode off across the common room and out of the rear entrance, thereby avoiding Tig, who was at the front one. Freya shook off this mysterious pronouncement with the full knowledge that she would soon know what it was about, and probably wish she didn't, and waved Tig over. She laughed as he tripped over nothing when he saw her, because it was such a Tig thing to do. Then she jumped up in order to meet him on her feet and wrap him up in a big hug. Freya didn't hug many people, but the wizard Tagorli was a special case. Freya, he said joyfully, long arms almost going around her twice, it seemed like. He put her away from him and smiled at her, dreamy blue eyes smiling too. He looked no older than he had last time she'd seen him, but then that was no surprise, considering the slow ageing of wizards. His light brown hair was long, far longer than it had been last time she'd seen him. Wild, fine and wavy, it floated around his head and shoulders like a cloud of brown smoke, or perhaps drifting seaweed. Well met, my friend, well met, he said cheerfully, arms waving dramatically. I'm so glad you have come to help us. We can't do this without you. Do what? Save the trees? Freya asked suspiciously, eyeing off the 4 obvious magic users and one strange hound who stood behind her friend and waited to be introduced. With 5 wizards, why the quiche would they need 1 warrior, no matter how effective a fighter? Yes, to save the trees. Here, Freya, my good friend, these are the mages of sin, who are also my good friends. This is Fjordrider, he said, pointing to a woman, who nodded calmly at Freya. Small and finely made, she had long, straight blonde hair and wore a sleeveless leather sky blue jerkin. It showed off slim, muscled arms that were fully tattooed in trails of leaves that gave Freya instant tattoo envy. The mage woman's slim legs were encased in some sort of loose pants, or perhaps also a skirt, and that billowed around her thighs, seeming to glow and shifting blue and purple colours with stars that came and went as she moved. Perhaps they were magic, because Freya had never seen anything like them before. She squinted a bit, not trusting her eyes. She also kept getting this impression of pointed ears, though the woman seemed to have perfectly normal ones when she looked closely. Fjordrider smiled at her knowingly. Fjordrider, Freya said, nodding back with equal apparent calm. Damn it, 5 wizards? She had long ago got rid of most of her preconceptions about magic users, but that didn't mean she wanted to be in the middle of 5 of them, only 1 of whom she trusted. Who are your other friends, she asked, looking beyond the woman to where the other 3 stood, crowded together between the benches of the common room. She noted, though, that nobody actually bumped into the wizards as the other patrons moved around the roadblock they had created, despite the crowding of the room. That is Shorneeby, Tig said, waving a long arm at the tallest of the wizards, who appeared to be winking at Freya until she realised he had a wonky eye. He looked quite jolly, even without the winking. He had a face that looked ready to smile. His brown going grey hair was cut short and stood akimbo in a just-got-up kind of way, and he had a rounded firmness to him that she liked. His outfit was of blue and white leather, skin-tight and shiny. He smiled at Freya. Well met, he said. I'm glad you came to fight with us. She realised then that he had a sword by his side, and so did the others. These were not magic users only. They were of the rare breed known as warrior mages. She nodded to back at Shorneeby with more respect because of it, and she wondered even more why she had been needed. And here is my good friend, or Sundrew, Tig said, clapping an arm around the young man who stepped up beside him now, the strange hound at his heels. Bulging oddly in the face and yet wrinkled, it looked like someone had blown it up like a full wineskin and then only half let the air out again. Drew, we call him, Tig was saying, patting Drew. And the Sharpie is called Haymash, he added, patting the dog instead. Haymash is a very rare breed of magical dog, he added proudly. Drew looked proud too, and he also looked about 20, though he could have been any age, being a wizard and all. He wore blue and green, all the bright shades of blue and green, and there was a hint of the sweeping styles of Tig in his tunic and trews. His hair was blonde and curly, and he had the eyes of a genius, bright and piercingly blue. He swept about to Freya, and she wondered if he caught that off to Gawley, who was prone to these sorts of displays. Freya, the young wizard said in a mellow, deep voice, head still bowed, I greet you as a friend of my friend. And I you, Freya said, and she couldn't help smiling at his Tigness. And last but not least, Tig said, is the wizard Vagina, our shining hope for the battle. He stepped back to present the last of his companions, who had been impatiently waiting for her turn and now kind of bounced forward to Freya, reaching for her forearm to clasp it in a friendly fashion. Another blonde with blue eyes and a bright, cheeky expression. She didn't look like a shining hope. She looked like a kid sister. In fact, she could have been Freya's kid sister at that. I've been dying to meet you, she said enthusiastically. Please don't call me by my wizard name. It's a quiche and horrible name. Call me Pen. That's what my friends call me because of my skill with words. It seemed like every sentence she spoke was an exclamation, and Freya once more felt herself warm to this new acquaintance. She looked them over, forearm still clasped by Pen, and what she saw made her feel happier to be there. She had no idea why they needed her, and she was going to get Tig in a headlock shortly to find out. But these magic users weren't the usual stuffy, pompous sorts. They looked like people she might like to get to know. I'm very glad to meet you all, she said, drawing her hand back from pen politely and using it to sketch a little Tiggish hand wave and head bow to them. I hope to get you all to know you all better, Tig. And Tig, can we have a quick chat in private? So there we go. That's the end of chapter 2 of the story. Maybe some of you recognised yourselves in there. If you did, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope everybody else enjoyed it. And I will see you at 4:30 my time next Sunday. Bye. Bye.